I'm interested in metaphor and how people use metaphor in discussions between atheists and Christians online. The PhD program that I'm involved in is in the languages department, so I'm looking at metaphor particularly from a linguistic perspective, but because I'm looking at language and interaction between religious and non-religious people, religious studies and other areas, it becomes quite interdisciplinary very quickly. But I wanted to start off by talking about, I've got sort of two parts to my presentation. The first one sort of talks about why YouTube is important, or why I think YouTube is important, and why in particular metaphor is important. And then I want to talk about why they matter just for discussion in general, and show a little bit of my data. Is this working now? Okay, good. I started getting interested in atheist-Christian dialogue about 3 years ago. I did a Master of Research at the same university I'm at now, where I was looking at discussion between, these are two YouTube users. One is called Jesus Freak 777. You can guess what his religious position is maybe from his name. This one is called Fake Sagan. Maybe you can guess his religious position from his username as well. But they were having a discussion that quickly became an argument. They were arguing with each other. The problem was Fake Sagan had originally asked whether or not, or was asking people why Christians oppose stem cell research. And, excuse me, Jesus Freak responded, and they ended up having an argument about what was appropriate activity online. So what was the appropriate things for people to say and do online. And Jesus Freak had a very strong opinion and about what you should and shouldn't say online. And Fake Sagan eventually called him the Pope of YouTube. He said, "You think you're the Pope of YouTube?" And I was interested in what happened with this term, the Pope of YouTube, because they were using the word the Pope of YouTube as they were arguing with each other. What does it mean to be the Pope of YouTube? What do you think it means to be the Pope of YouTube? Do you have any ideas? Okay, what do you
Well,
think?
I guess the Pope is like the religious leader who makes all the rules, and so like if you're the Pope of YouTube, you'd be like a religious rule maker of YouTube.
Yeah, so that was sort of the intention of what he was trying to insult him with, by saying this person thinks essentially that he has an authority that he doesn't actually have. The problem was they were talking about the Pope of YouTube. What the actual issue was in their disagreement sort of got obscured, or got left behind, and they started talking about this metaphor. What does it mean to be the Pope of YouTube? And before long, that metaphor became actually a part of the misunderstanding between them, because they had a different idea of what it meant to be the Pope of YouTube. So I was interested in discussions between atheists and Christians, and I was finding actually that a lot of these discussions take place, and they become not just discussions about religion, but they end up becoming what they call YouTube drama. Does anyone ever heard of YouTube drama? You've heard of flaming online?
Yeah.
Taking part in flaming online, right? Where you have these interpersonal arguments between people that flare up. That's where that metaphor of flaming comes from. On YouTube, they tend to call it drama, where they argue about these interpersonal issues. And I was noticing that in the Christian and atheist discussions that people were having, a lot of the time, drama was an important part of the arguments, these interpersonal arguments. And not only was the drama an important part of the arguments, but whenever there was a drama episode where people were arguing with each other, you'd have two groups of people, right? You'd have people on one side and then people on another side, and they would argue with each other back and forth. And what I was interested in was how does metaphor use contribute to this emergence where you have one group of people and another group of people. One group of people say, he thinks he's the Pope of YouTube, and the other person saying, I don't think I'm the Pope of YouTube. That's a wrong way of talking about it. You have these two groups that seem to be arguing against each other. And so I was interested in how these groups emerge, and I was also interested in whether or not metaphor played an important part in it, because it played such an important part in that first example that I showed you. So this is sort of the methods that I'm using for doing the research that I'm doing. I don't know how familiar you are with research. I think that the difference between sort of the lecture that you saw earlier and the kind of thing that I'm doing is I'm going out into the real world and looking at people talking to each other. Okay, I'm really interested in interaction between people in the real world and studying that kind of interaction, trying to figure out what's happening, as opposed to looking at religious texts or looking at I don't know, any other source of data. The data that I'm really interested in is interaction between real people in the real world, and how these I don't know, allegories like Dante's Inferno or from the Bible or from other religious texts, how those influence the discussions that people are having. And we'll see that in the data that I'm looking at, actually. So